was reading the finance segments of some of the UK's finest publications the other day. The Daily Mail, The Sun, The Beano. And I couldn't help but notice that this formerly Great Britain was in something of a perilous state, financially speaking.
Anyway, so Rachel Reeve's very worried. She's going to borrow money to fund extra spending on new infrastructure.
How can she borrow more
We haven't got any money.
100% of GDP as our national debt is now.
The nation's credit card is maxed out.
Yeah.
We're broken economically as our national debt explodes.
Might it be this brittle isle buckling under the weight of its endemic and really spoken about tax avoidance addiction?
3 American multinationals, Google, Starbucks and Amazon, with big sales in the UK, who don't seem to pay much tax.
It seems to me that this is a system specifically designed to avoid tax.
Our sluggish growth since leaving the European Union.
Brexit is and was and will be a total disaster.
Brexit is doing the economy real damage.
Brexit, as negotiated, is frankly a disaster.
Or perhaps a generation of Tory administrations looting the treasury to funnel cash to their donors, then borrowing billions to make up the difference. No, of course not. That all sounds like a lefty conspiracy theory to me.
With the arrival of so-called 15-minute cities.
Why would anyone ever want to block out the sun?
People in our government who are working towards a deep state.
No. This is the fault of a broken asylum system and immigrants who somehow, despite paying tax and therefore having a right to use the services they're paying for, somehow overwhelm them. But again, I cannot stress this enough. There is definitely no tax avoidance problem here. It's not an addiction. We have it under control.
If you get into the kind of fundamentals of the tax system, you'll start to quickly realise that there are these very obvious inequities.
Because we in Britain are in a monstrous amount of debt, solely and exclusively because foreigners keep coming here and draining us of our money.
Let's take these asylum seekers or these illegal immigrants that are coming over and immediately getting jobs with Deliveroo.
Indeed, an asylum system that only costs $5 billion a year, and actually, once the visas and NHS surcharges are factored in, almost pays for itself, can somehow inhabit its own space in the mathematical universe, where the $5 billion that it's costing actually costs us the hundreds of billions of pounds that we borrow every year through the bonds market. Now, don't ask me how that works. Sorry, how does this 5 billion asylum shit equate to 148 billion in bonds aid? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I'm just telling you who I hate. As I scan down the blogs, the opinion pages and the mad scribblings that adorn the walls of the mental asylums where one might also find the work of these contributing journalists, we can't afford any more. I'm sorry to tell you, Britain is full. I found myself wondering if there might be other avenues, cul-de-sacs. Well, maybe not cul-de-sacs, because then you would just go down to the end of the road and you would get stuck at the end. But you get my point. Other solutions for ways to get the national debt down so that we might avoid another financial crisis, or maybe, if it doesn't spook the inflation boogeymen, maybe we might enjoy a tax cut or two.
These are all big giveaways, and for many people will be very attractive, but the issue is, can you actually finance them?
Because you don't have to go too far to find celebrated thinkers of the intellectual right who are certain we need to bring taxes down.
So let's start with axing the tax.
Tax cut after tax cut after tax cut. He promised to cut taxes, cut fuel duty, abolish business rates.
To compare it to Liz Truss is wrong.
Axing the tax.
Now that's $11.5 billion that's not going to defence.
To compare it to Liz Truss is wrong.
It's Liz Truss all over again.
That's not going to the NHS.
Tax cut after tax cut.
That's not going to be spent on public services.
To compare it to Liz Truss is wrong.
Where are you going to get it from?
So I asked myself, what do they know that I don't? Or why aren't they? Or indeed the Labour government just getting on with it? How should we get the national debt down? How might we avoid economic collapse? At first I went to the Bank of England and looked up what the current national debt actually is. I mean, it can't be that bad if Richard Tice and Nigel Farage, Liz Truss, the Mail, the Express, the Telegraph all seem to want to slash taxes radically. And they would only be able to afford to do that if the debt wasn't of eye-watering concern, if it wasn't worsening every day, if it didn't send even the most centred, reasonable of economists into an hysterical spiral of existential dread.
You've got a Reform Party who are dealing and peddling, I'm afraid, fantasy economics.
I entered the Bank of England to get a figure to work with. And then I was asked to leave some 3 minutes later after vomiting in shock at the number they'd told me. It was a dynamic I hadn't experienced since asking my wife the number of lovers she had taken, but I digress. Composing myself, I reasoned if anything, I would be thinking about probably having to raise taxes, but no, obviously that is not what we're doing because we are already at the highest tax burden in 75 years, came a voice from the back of my mind. And I don't mean figuratively or metaphorically, I mean physically from the back, from the behind of my head where a Tufton Street lobbyist was standing, simultaneously jerking off a billionaire and spraying fossil fuels into the sky. Well, how can we increase the money that's coming into the Treasury? I wondered. Maybe there's a product we could legalise and tax that has since been shown to be less harmful than we had previously envisaged. Maybe other countries have legalised it and made money for their exchequers that way.
Let's legalise cannabis.
Cannabis should be legalised to end the embarrassment of domestic drugs policy.
We're going to make £32 billion a year.
It'll bring in tax revenue from the government, that is true.
I mean, I personally don't want it to be normalised because I don't think it's great for your mental or physical health.
Is to get rid of these wretched,
For your mental health.
god-awful,
For your mental health.
damned, blinking,
For your mental health.
uncomfortable, scientifically empty, useless masks. This is Talk Radio.
But no.
Both want to legalise possession of natural cannabis. Do you support them?
No, that's not the government position, and we're not going to be changing our policy there.
And have you ever taken drugs?
I've taken paracetamol, codeine and all sorts, yes.
How surprised would you be that there were drug users in the House of Commons?
Class A drugs are bad, and bad for society, bad for opportunity. That's my view.
Have you ever taken cocaine, Mr. Johnson? Have you ever taken cocaine, yes or no?
I don't support decriminalisation.
David Cameron, heady tales of drug use who sat around getting stoned.
I don't support decriminalisation.
When did you last take any drugs?
Harry, I had a good time when I was a student.
What does a good time when you're a student look like?
It means I had a good time when I was a student.
But what does that mean? It
means I had a good time when I was a student.
Smoking some spliffs, doing some acid, partying, drugs. What was it?
A good time.
No, imagine my disappointment at hearing weed and MDMA are simply much too dangerous. I'm going to need a cigarette for this. Maybe we should think outside the box a bit, you know? Maybe we should give the people what they want, was my next idea.
Let's talk about the highest tax burden since the Second World War, shall we?
I mean, no. People don't want to pay any more tax. I think that is a given. No, they don't want cuts to public services. No, they don't want more
I don't support decriminalisation.
Dirty drugs, more violent thugs, out of their minds on their ecstasy tablets, savagely beating their spouses while on ecstasy. The public don't need or want that. That's why they're content with safe drugs like alcohol. So why not give the public something they do like? Why don't we seek to make money out of something that the public will willingly pay for? Like an open-air festival event where each punter can pay £250 a ticket. No, not like that. Not that. What that is hate speech. No, you would pay £250 a ticket and stand there in front of a stage, and every 7 minutes, another one of the politicians and journalists responsible for getting us into this fiscal mess is dragged out on stage and repeatedly hit with the claw hammer. I'm just saying it's an option. Guys, if your goal is to get rid of your debt, people would buy those tickets. And with the capitalist marvel of dynamic pricing, you could probably clear the national debt and afford a few new F-15 fighter jets and a burglar alarm to stop them getting a guerrilla paint job.
That's when they broke into RAF Bryce Norton and vandalised military aircraft.
I mean, that's if you wanted to avoid graffiti on publicly owned transport items, which I think we established in the last one of these that everybody does. It is one of the biggest parliamentary priorities, guys. Maybe a wealth tax, I then wondered. Maybe, even though I had been terrified at the prospect of the super wealthy fleeing, maybe we could adopt a similar idea as I had heard from the paid-for shills representing the super rich.
The minute we leave the EU, we are going to have a 300% shortfall in vets. And this is not me scaremongering, it's a fact.
But I still, if we need vets, then we'll...
When they were warned pre-Brexit that we would have a shortage of carers and vets and teachers, and they just said, well, we'll just have to find more British carers and vets and teachers. Well, maybe now that we are at risk of losing the billionaires, maybe we will just have to find some good old-fashioned British billionaires now, won't we? Is what I wondered. Maybe that's... No, wait. We can't assume that we can fashion and nurture our own British people to become the business visionaries of tomorrow. We're too shit. I forgot that. Indeed, it is one of the great paradoxes of the modern Brexit right, that we are simultaneously global Britain. We should be in charge of our own destiny. We don't need the EU or the institutions. We can run our own affairs. This is bloody Britain. While at the same time, we couldn't possibly survive, nay thrive, with a fully functioning NHS or tech or business sector with British billionaires because we're too shit. So no, not dissimilarly to those graffitied and ruined for all time F-15 fighter jets, the wealth tax would never fly. Finally, I surmised that if we were unable to grow, unable to get money in, unable to hike taxes, if we were prohibited from running what would almost certainly be pre-categorized as a proscribed terror cell in live festival form. I mean, if spray painting planes and performing a rap song get you prosecuted these days, it's difficult to imagine a violent physical assault on a politician on stage would fall into the Daily Mail's parameters as protected freedom of expression. But if we were robbed of all of these options, finally, perhaps regrettably, we could sell the China. The Falklands are a collection of islands out in the South Pacific, retained by Britain, by Thatcher in 1982. The oil reserves off these islands are thought to be worth billions. Fishing rights there are valued at between 1 to 2 billion a year. Argentina obviously want them. And if not, the United States of America are going through a sort of expansionist phase right now.
You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. We need them for economic security.
The U.S. president questioning an attack on Canada. The Americans could be violating UN rules.
We need the money, and frankly, holding on to them feels like seeing your friend hold on to his 1982 Ford Capri that's worth an absolute shit ton at the classic cars auction. But meanwhile, he's enveloped into £40,000 of credit card debt. You're like, Dave, just sell the bloody car. And Dave is like, no, I could never do that. This car has too much sentimental value. What might be the reaction of the Gaminati? I wondered.
With the disruption we had during the First and Second World Wars, would a no-deal Brexit really be that bad?
Let's call the EU's bluff, and let's just see what Barney and his bunch of cronies want to do about it then.
Servicemen and servicewomen have died for freedom and our system. If you have another vote, will they have died for nothing?
Traitors like you were told. You are a traitor. You are a traitor to this country.
Might this be a bit of a sensitive area for them?
A group surrounded the Labour leader and screamed traitor at him.
Given the history? No, I concluded. Because if we are to take them at their word, which how else could you take them, they actually really like satellite geopolitical entities being cut free from their Death Star overlords.
Independence Day!
Our country's Independence Day.
Britain enjoys its sovereignty, having been unshackled from the evil EU. So why should the Falklands not be similarly liberated? Furthermore, we, Britain, paid £50 billion to leave the European Union. And that was widely, broadly, insanely seen as a price worth paying. So surely these same fiscal savants who wanked themselves limp over that shit as an excellent deal for all concerned will celebrate this one in a similar capacity. I mean, otherwise it would be two-tier liberation or something, wouldn't it? And that wouldn't do at all. Now, I know it would be tricky. I know there would be some feelings. I'm fully aware that it would be difficult given how recent in our history the Falklands conflict was. And believe me when I say, I don't want to rob anyone of their glory. And whatever I say here today, whatever happens politically, I am sure Prince Andrew will be remembered a hero. But selling those islands for an absolute gangload of cash might well go some way to clearing the national debt. And look, if it still doesn't sit right, if it's still leaving a nasty taste in your mouth, try to think of it like this. Think of the Falklands as a publicly owned entity. Think of the Falklands as an asset on the Treasury spreadsheet. And then it's not too much of a stretch to think of this as austerity.
Starmer's speech to reset the state. He said it's become flabby.
To addressing the complete bloating of the welfare state.
It's not that we are callously selling off something you inexplicably love, despite most of you never having set foot there. It is just a bloated British state that needs reform for the 21st century.